When the Pilgrims arrived on Cape Cod on November 21st, 1620, after 65 days at sea on the Mayflower, it's a safe bet they were a thankful group filled with anticipation and likely some trepidation of what their future in this strange land that is now Massachusetts would hold. It didn't take long to figure out the barren wilderness of Provincetown wasn't for them, so 6 weeks later, crossed the bay to Plymouth, and the rest, as they say, is history. Provincetown obviously hasn't suffered from their 17th century rejection, becoming one of the Cape's most visited tourist communities.
Provincetown is the biggest little city in the world. How's that? Our year-round population is 3,800 people, and in the summertime that swells to about 35,000. And one of the great things about Provincetown, it's a place where everybody comes and they feel very comfortable here. And at one time at the turn of the century, in the 1899, 1900s, it was the largest art colony in the world. I think any place at the end of a peninsula is an attraction. I think we are very unique within ourselves, just like Key West is unique within itself too, because I really enjoy it there. But I think anything at the end of anywhere, like, you have to go there just to see what it is. And if you get sand in your shoes, you're going to stay here because you just can't leave, or you're going to keep coming back over and over again, which helps us in the tourism industry. This is the place where the Pilgrims landed in 1620, not Plymouth, and they spent 6 weeks here, and we have a beautiful monument to commemorate that fact that was paid for with donations from school children and from the federal government, and it was built and completed in 1910, and it's the tallest peak on Cape Cod.
523 feet tall with sweeping views in all directions. On a clear day, you can see all the way to Boston and Plymouth. At the base of the hill on which it's built, a bas-relief commemorating the Pilgrims' first landfall in the New World. Provincetown is proud of its first place in history.
Well, the Pilgrims landed here first. We were the first major art colony in the world, and we were the first in whale watching, which started about 24 years ago. And the way that whale watching started is that we had a couple of gentlemen that had boats that took people out on fishing trips. And there were so many whales out there that people would, instead of fishing, would run over to the side of the boat and watch the whales. And so the captain of the whale watch boat, his name was Al Avalar, and he's still alive today, decided he was going to change over to a whale watch expedition. He actually started the whale watch industry on the East Coast, and it's a multi-million-dollar business today.
We're going to be headed out area probably about 11 miles north and east of where we are right now, to where we had whales on the previous trip. We saw quite a few humpback whales on the last one, so see what we find out there today. Possible we could encounter one right here for that matter, so keep your eyes peeled.
See it up there, or just a little spurt out? Oh, see the tail? Yeah.
Here comes that tail, and that is Ember. Now, humpback whales are considered an endangered species. Slowly getting a little closer here. Sometimes we do have to be a little bit patient, but looking out at 12:30 now, you can see that animal's dorsal fin. Well, on board the boats, we're actually recording when and where we see pretty much any kind of a marine mammal, or large fish for that matter. If we encounter humpback whales, we'll be photographing them, and that kind of information goes to our catalog of animals that we maintain back at the center, so knowing a little bit about who the animals are. Well, I'd like to think it's fairly important to the conservation of these animals, particularly with extremely endangered animals like right whales, where there are so few. You know, most of our work is focused on understanding, first of all, who these animals are, how many there are, how human activities affect them, and trying to understand a little bit more about how we can go about changing our ways in the ocean and make their world a little safer for them. Particularly looking at things like large shipping traffic, fishing gear in the water column really poses a threat to these animals. A lot of the humpback whales we'll see today probably have scars on their tails from entanglements at one point in their lives. So definitely a lot of our activities out here play a major role, and we're trying to understand how that impacts these animals a little better. Also, we like to try to inspire a little bit of a conservation ethic in people, you know, to try to understand a little bit more about our natural world and hope that they care about it a little more and want to do something to make it better for these animals. Here comes her tail.
Cape Cod National Seashore is an American treasure administered, preserved, and protected by the National Park Service. It comprises over 43,000 acres of shoreline and upland landscape. Within the park, a 40-mile stretch of pristine sandy beach, dozens of clear, deep freshwater kettle ponds and salt marsh. Also here, several historic Cape Cod buildings and lighthouses. Since 1946, the Costa family, first Art and his wife, then son Rob, have been showing off Provincetown's treasure of dunes and beach, which is now part of the National Seashore.
Well, I always love taking people out there on tour because, especially people that have been coming to Provincetown for years and first-timers that have never been out there, because it's the biggest part of Provincetown. We have about 4,000 acres of the Cape Cod National Seashore in Provincetown's backyard, and it's just amazing because most of the people that come here don't even know that this area exists. And it's definitely the road less traveled. I mean, out of the 55,000 people that we have here during July and August, I wish we could say we took that many out. Now, before 1961, anybody could drive anywhere out there in the dunes, and it was quite a lot of fun. But then when the park came in, declared it National Seashore, with it came a lot of rules and regulations that, quite frankly, a lot of people weren't really used to abiding by. You know, the idea of regulating the trails and marking the trails, and people were just like, wow, we're not used to this. And every few years after 1961, just more of the dune area has been cut back, and the usage of the dunes have been cut back from the public until about 1981 or so. The National Seashore decided to clear the entire dune area off from the public. And the only people allowed out there now are the dune tours and the people who live out there in the dune shacks. True story though, I took my mom on a dune tour maybe 4 years ago, because I'd never been on her ride and she's never been on my tour, so I figured we'd share information. And boy, that was the first time I ever was speechless, because on my tour in front of everyone, she told me I was conceived behind that shack. So I was like, that's TMI, Ma. Too much information, yeah. But it's kind of a cute story, so I tell it. She's going to kill me if she ever finds out this is on TV. Actually, it was my dad who started it. His name's Art, and that's why it's called Art's Dune Tours. And he started it in 1946 in a 1936 Ford Woody. That was his first truck. So we've been out here. Next year's our big 6-0. 6-8. Now there have been 14 companies or so that have been coming and gone throughout the years, but we've persevered. We're the only ones left, really. We're the only ones surviving. And I think the main reason because of that is the fact that my father had a really love for this. I mean, wait till you see when we get out there. It's just incredible. And just to do this every day in the season and meet all the people and just see all the dunes, it kept him going. It was was his life. It wasn't his job, you know what I mean? And he had an undying passion for it. And that's he wasn't really in it for the quick money, like all the 14 companies that have come and gone. He just loved it, and it was his little business. And he had to work in the wintertime, so I think that passion is what made us persevere as a company. So pretty proud of that. He left us a nice legacy to continue on with, you know. It's a very magical place because a lot of people come out here for so many different reasons. You know, we've had people come out here and remember their lost ones. We've had people come out and celebrate marriage. People come out here write, paint, or just enjoy the beautiful view and the fresh air and our silly little stories. And just, I mean, it's something for everyone out here, you know. It's just really, really amazing.
Tours stop twice. On the first, there's a nice trail to hike up for a view of the valley. On the sunset tour, they stop along the beach and Rob sets up for a classic New England clam bake. And of course, a spectacular sunset. Weather dependent, of course. On both sides of the Cape are dozens of quaint New England communities, beaches, safe harbors, and marinas. Anchorage for everything from 8-foot dinghies to large yachts of the rich and famous. Less rich, and perhaps more famous, charter fishing captain Bob Luce on the Striper starts his day at Harwich Harbor well before dawn. Bob's a retired commercial fisherman whose romance with the sea just won't let him give it up.
I start the end of May and I'll get done the middle of October. This is my favorite time of year if it's not windy, you know. Less boats, usually the fishing is pretty good. And the chances of getting a real big one are better.
Wow.
That's a nice one. Yeah, I think you're on his line, Mike. Go behind you. All right, stay right there. Stay right there.
On days like this, the magic of the sea is so awesome, even the most grounded of landlubbers can appreciate its great attraction to seafarers over the centuries. The clients with Bob on this particular day have been with him for over 10 years, with a date booked every other week through the entire season. This is exciting fishing. Bob's technique is based on the changing tide. He positions his boat right on the edge of a rip where the tides meet, which is also where the bait are concentrated, and of course, so too the striped bass feeding on them.
Let it go. Let the line go.
The action can be non-stop when all the conditions are right.
These are feeding stations for them, you know. You have all this flat water around there, and then there's a shoal here where the bottom comes way up to probably only 8 or 9 feet here. And when the bait flows across this, they lay on the deep edge. Just like a trout hiding behind a rock in the brook.
Clients on the Striper use fly rods, since they're not only more exciting, but fight the fish more effectively than a conventional rod. And there's no casting involved, so you don't need to be a fly angler to use them.
Got him now.
Limit is 2 fish over 32 inches per angler.
All right.
Though most of their catch is striped bass, an occasional false albacore, a tuna-like fish, or a bluefish will also take the flock. If you don't have a boat, surf casting from the beach is another popular sport here on the Cape. With the proper permits, you can even 4-wheel out on the beach for fishing and camping if you're self-contained. There's a huge amount of commercial ship traffic between Boston and New York. The Cape Cod Canal was built in 1914. It cuts right through the base of the Cape, virtually turning it into an island, connected to the mainland by 3 bridges, 1 rail, and 2 highways.
We have nearly 20,000 vessels that use the canal each year. About 8,000 of those are considered large commercial traffic, meaning they're at least 65 feet in length. That includes a lot of tug and barge units, tankers, car carriers, cruise ships. Not only does it save 135 miles, provide that shortcut, which is fuel savings and time savings, it also allows vessels to take an inland water route versus having to go around the outer cape and the islands. Historically, there were a lot of shipwrecks along the outer cape because you have this exposed area with lots of shoaling and frequent fog. In addition to the navigation, we're also operated as a federal recreation area. So we have about 3.5 million people that visit the canal each year for boating, fishing, bicycling, rollerblading, and a lot of our public education tours.
There's a sophisticated control center that monitors canal traffic, regulating ship passage and permissions. They've integrated 5 radars, 11 closed-circuit video feeds with wind, air current, and water temperature measurement sensors that are all combined to give controllers an immediate and complete picture of all vessels and conditions in the canal and its approaches. The Corps of Engineers also run regular patrols on the canal with a 24-hour watch just in case of emergency. Tides run a swift 4 to 6 knots through the canal, so smaller boats need to time their passage with favorable tides. Across from Cape Cod, the Pilgrims' final landing spot. Plymouth is a relaxed little seaside town, comfortable in its present, but proud of its very historic past. Plymouth Rock marks the arrival of the Pilgrims here, plus there are numerous monuments, statues, and attractions relating to the first settlers. Along with a replica of the Mayflower. But the most significant and historic reason to visit Plymouth is here.
I'm standing here in the oldest continuously operating museum in America. The Pilgrim Society was formed in 1820 at the time of the 200th anniversary of the landing of the Pilgrims at Plymouth. And there was so much interest at that time, and so many people in town had artifacts in their parlors and their attics, that the Pilgrim Society decided to found a museum. It was built and opened at 1824, and we have been here as a museum ever since. And we have here the artifacts that represent the beginnings of America. We are the museum that has the original artifacts that belong to those Mayflower passengers of 1620. We have William Bradford's Bible. We have Miles Standish's sword. We have the cradle of Peregrine White, the portrait of Edward Winslow. The list just goes on and on. We have 2 Bibles here that came on the Mayflower. The top is the Geneva Bible, published in 1592, that belonged to William Bradford. The Geneva Bible was the Bible that was used by the English separatists. This is the portrait of Edward Winslow. It's the only portrait of a pilgrim that was actually done from life. We have no idea of what any of the other pilgrims actually looked like. Any other pictures that you see of pilgrims are imaginary. That is a book that was published in 1628. We know that Pilgrim William Brewster had a copy of that particular book, as the cup belongs to the longtime governor of Plymouth Colony, William Bradford. It was made in England in 1634, and it has the governor's initials on it. That was his personal cup. And the Bible is a second edition Eliot Bible that was dated from 1685. It's the Bible translated into the Native American language. You know, the Pilgrims have been portrayed in story, in song, on television, Snoopy specials, you know, Hallmark cards, in every textbook imaginable. And sometimes, as wonderful as that does, is it turns the Pilgrims into kind of 2-dimensional tales for tots, and they lose their complexity, they lose their depth, they lose their ability for modern people to relate to them. And that's not who the Pilgrims are. They were very complex people. They were facing very, very difficult issues. They didn't know how their story was going to end. And so what I hope will happen when people visit Pilgrim Hall Museum is that They will become engaged with the pilgrims by interacting in a way with the artifacts that we have of the pilgrims, that they will get curious about them, and that then they'll do further reading, further research, want to learn more about these magnificent people.
Massachusetts produces about a third of all the cranberries grown in the world, contributing over $200 million in payroll to the state economy.
You know, they grow on a vine, they grow differently than any other commodity. The harvest there's nothing like it with any other agricultural commodity. We flood the bogs, we beat them off the vines, we truck them into here and clean them, and that's a very efficient way to harvest. The old-fashioned way of people on their hands and knees with scoops and later on with dry harvest machines, that doesn't exist anymore, except a few with the machines for the purpose of selling those berries as fresh fruit into the holiday market. This time of the year the growers harvest, mostly water harvest, and they bring those berries in here to be cleaned, where we separate the rot and the debris from the good berries, washed off with clean water, put into bins, put into the freezer for future use.
We can go from 18,000 pounds to 30,000 pounds, depends on the flow we need for the day and also the fruit quality. After that first table there, we de-shaft, we get a lot of the vine out and some of the loose leaves that might come in. That's the blower you'll see in the background. The next table there, you can see at that next angle, right there, we size the berries before they go into the Bailey separators. In 1923, there's called the bounce boards. There's 7 layers in there. The first 4 your fresh fruit, the next 2 your canners, and the next one is raw. Anything that does not bounce ends up in the blue bin. And then after the Bailey boards will elevate one more time, they'll go through a color sorter room. We can pick out what we want. So the next machine is called a UV machine. Takes out the poppers. They'll still bounce, but they're full of juice. We don't want that in a bag. We want the nice solid fruit. And the next stage there is we still do a physical inspection. Even though we have the machinery, we'd love to just double up, check it. They'll roll, look for a soft one. There might be a vine that comes through, and there might be a color one that actually goes through. And the next stage elevates one more time into our packing room, which is M26. Comes up through our pack machine. We have a couple of Hastings crayons wrapped, and then we bag them into the boxes, and off they go. Stack them up on a pallet into the trailer.
The witch hysteria of the late 1600s has stayed with Salem, and in fact been embraced by the community with an enthusiasm generated by tourism dollars. The local graveyard and miscellaneous witch museums and attractions do hauntingly good business leading up to the season finale of Halloween. Witches notwithstanding, the community has a rich history in the development of America. At one time, it was the 6th largest city in the country, with one of the wealthiest and busiest ports in North America. The National Park Service operates a regional visitors bureau here, just across the street from one of New England's most respected institutions, the Peabody Essex Museum. Testament to the community's vast riches and success, a remarkable collection of pre-20th century architecture, including many from the 1700s. Here too, in a complex of several historic homes, the House of Seven Gables, inspiration for Nathaniel Hawthorne's book. The oldest building in town, the famous Corwin or Witch House from the mid-1600s. In late 1773, when this harbor was filled with tea, few could have dreamt that Boston would become one of America's most dynamic and important cities. With Harvard and MIT in nearby Cambridge and a host of other extraordinary colleges within cannon shot, the greater metropolitan area has been the single most important benefactor from this wealth of knowledge and expertise. This is a city that embraces its history. It was here at the Old North Church on April 18, 1775, that Reverend Robert Newman hung 2 lanterns in the tower that sent Paul Revere on his midnight ride to Lexington and Concord to warn Samuel Adams and John Hancock that the British were coming. In addition to young Paul Revere's other varied and diverse talents, he was a change ringer here at Christ Church, which is actually the proper name of the Old North Church.
I don't think anybody knows how change ringing started. Partly it's rooted in the physics of how the bells are hung, and the fact that it swings completely upside down is something that had to have been put in place before change ringing could have been invented. Once you've got that, then people will have quickly cottoned on to the idea, hey, you know, I can control the speed when this bell's going to strike, so why not try and ring them in order? And over time, people will get the idea of changing that order, because, you know, we're the way we are, we're human beings, and, you know, well, let's, gee, I've got 5 bells, I got 120 different ways I can order them, let's see how I can do that. And so somehow that arose in Renaissance England. The first book about change ringing was published in the 18th century, so there was some kind of change ringing, you know, before that book was published, but it's grown by leaps and bounds since then.
And when it's just swinging like this, then it's chiming, and then as it gets higher and higher, it'll go around until finally it'll be going in almost a full circle, sort of like this. So, and then you can actually, like it is here, you can rest it standing up, and that's what we do sort of in between things that we ring so that people can rest and we can switch people and switch what we're ringing and things like that. We don't ring songs, we sort of do number patterns. This is sort of the simplest pattern right here. Each bell has a number. This is the treble, and it's number 1, it's the lightest bell, and they go all the way around to the tenor, which is number 8. And you can just ring them in order for a while, and that's called rounds. It's just a descending scale. And that gets boring after a while, so you want to switch it up. But because some of the heaviest bells can take up to 2 seconds to swing around, you can't really change the rhythm very easily, which is why we don't do actual regular songs that people would recognize, like hymns or something like that.
You know, part of it's kinesthetic, part of it becomes almost like meditation, part of it's just hanging out with some really cool people and having a lot of fun. Part of it's a sense of service, part of it's the sense of accomplishment. It's a really hard thing to do, and it takes years to learn to do, and learning to do it well is fun. Surprisingly, while it's an ancient art, it's something that's you know, just as vibrant today as it's ever been. People are ringing things now that, you know, 20 years ago were thought to be impossible.
An historic building for a host of reasons, it's also the oldest church in Boston and one of the most popular destinations for visitors to the city. Just a block or so away, history comes alive in the most unusual of places, the Copp's Hill Burying Ground. Dates back to 1660, and it sits on one of the highest points in the city. Curiously, there's a great attraction to old cemeteries. Another historic site nearby, Paul Revere's house, built in 1680. Paul Revere lived here from 1770 to 1800. In western Massachusetts, the Taconic and Hoosac Mountains, rolling hills, dense forest, farms, rural villages, and small towns. This is the Berkshires. Rural and scenic, the Berkshires are punctuated by a smattering of industry. It was here paper for Paul Revere's first paper currency was made, and Crane still makes the paper for America's currency.
In the 1800s, every national bank was allowed to produce its own currency, and so Crane contracted either directly with the banks or with engravers to produce currency paper for literally thousands of banks around the United States. Now, during the Civil War, United States currency was nationalized because counterfeiting was a very serious problem. So we wanted to create a single look so that people could recognize across the country that a bill was genuine. And Crane won its first contract to produce United States currency paper in 1879 and has won the bids ever since.
This is paper made from cotton fibers, not wood pulp, and it's a process that's changed little over the last 200 years. Though it has been mechanized, the elements of the process are very similar.
We're in Crane's Pioneer Mill, where America's last rag room is. Today, they're making raw materials for United States currency paper. You're seeing an open bale here of thread, 100% cotton thread, that's being sorted for contaminants such as plastic, pieces of metal, anything that's not cotton. And after it goes through the inspection process, it goes through a large industrial shredder to tear down these little pieces of thread into individual cotton fibers. Cotton and linen fibers used to make currency paper contain a certain amount of contaminants, things that are not cellulose. In order to remove those contaminants, Crane literally cooks these fibers in giant rotating cauldron filled with water, steam, and a caustic solution. And they are cooked for about an hour and a half or 2.5 hours, depending on the level of contaminants. And then they move on to get cleaned and bleached and made into raw materials. After the fibers have been cooked, they need to be washed and they need to be shortened because they're too long to be made into paper at the moment. So they go into a large machine that is actually an industrial laundry. But also there are rotating blades in there which cut the fibers halfway to length for paper making. After the fibers have been washed and cut halfway to length, they're ready to go to the paper machine. But we have to get them from here to the paper machine. And right now, they're mostly water. So we've got to get a significant amount of the water out of this pulp because who wants to truck around water? So we've modified a paper machine here which by suction and by gravity takes water out through a movable screen. The pulp is then picked up by a couple of moving felts and then it goes through some press rollers to get moisture out that way, and then it's stacked on skids by what we call a wet lap machine because it's wet and it laps back and forth.
In the hills of western Massachusetts, it's still possible to pursue a life more traditional to the country. Two stories. Artist Alan James Robinson and partner E. Voorhees at Running Fox Farm, and Susan Salou at Rossenbrook Farm in Monterey.
I milk 45 milking goats, and we make about 500 pounds of cheese a week, fresh chevs, and we sell it, some in Boston, some in New York, and a major portion of it here in the Berkshires. They like being milked. They also don't like to be out there. It's too hot, it's sunny. We feed them something that they think is tastier than that grass, and we force them out there in the morning. It's embarrassing. We force them out there and then they run home. I love their mischievous nature. It's the thing that drives some people crazy about them, and that's people, they have a bad reputation, but it's just because they're mischievous and they don't obey. They're always smiling. They're in the, you know, life is never dull for them. They're always up for something interesting, always looking for something interesting to do. Eating is what it's all about. To make a lot of milk, it's 20% genetics and 80% nutrition in my estimation. And my job is to bring them enough high quality, excellent food that they will love, that they will eat. And contrary to popular belief, goats eat unusual things, but they are the fussiest of any animal that I've ever had. And I used to have what I called the old McDonald syndrome, so I've had quite a few. They are, like right now I'm trying to buy hay, and it's always, you bring some home, it looks perfectly good, but there might be something in it they don't like, and they won't eat it. Pretty well. Okay, goat number 1. They get a little grain in here. We milk twice a day. We milk morning and evening from the middle of March, when they have their kids, until the first week of January. At that point they are halfway through their pregnancy and their milk production is dwindling, so we give them some dry time. I get a little time to do some planning. You can see the milk coming down. It has these clear inflations. And so we do that milking twice a day. We make cheese every other day. The goat cheese that I make, I mean, there are as many kinds of goat cheese as there are people to make it, but we make just a fresh chev here that is just a very simple curd that doesn't have a terribly complex flavor because it's not aged, but I like it to be tart and tangy and taste very fresh and spring-like all year long. It has a texture that is hopefully not too dry. I don't like it dry in the back of the throat, but yet, you know, not creamy like you think it's cream cheese either. I work hard at that consistency because my goats are at the same point in their lactation all together throughout the year. I don't really have a standardized milk. You know, when they freshen, the milk has certain qualities, and then in the middle of the summer it's a different milk, and now they're making a transition now into their fall milk. And we do little, even though it's just a fresh chev, we do things in the cheese room to adjust for each season, and that's fun, learning how to do that and what that is, trying new things all the time. Don't like to just do the same old. Same old cheese, same old product, but different ways to get to the same end is fun.
Well, we've turned the milking barn and the ice room into my studio where I paint every day, and Eve, being the horse trainer, she's utilizing the barn, and we've changed our life from living in 2 separate, I rented a carriage house for 8 years, you know, and she had a small place that wasn't big enough for horses, so she was part owners in another farm that was 45 minutes each way away. So we're just trying to get our lives together, quit commuting so much, and working more and more every month out of the house. Well, I'm actually doing an original watercolor on a topo map. A client that actually has a small lodge and camp on the pond in the river, which is in part of the Rangeley area, has asked me to do brook trout, which is no surprise for a person from Maine, since they're arguably the most beautiful freshwater fish that there is. And he wanted me to do a real nice colored up fall one here which you can maybe make out that he's going to be chasing a gray ghost when I finish painting that fly in. And then a smaller fish, which you also catch a lot more of, but to try and make the composition. And then when it's all finished, up here, sort of away from where he'd want to talk about, I'm actually going to paint his lodge, his camp, so that this will have a very specific and intimate portrait of his life in the areas where he hunts and fishes. And then if you look really closely, you can actually see some of the information showing through my painting, because I'm painting in what's considered a glazing technique. I'm using opaque watercolor because I need a dense watercolor to create the illusion of three-dimension. But I also, at the same time, I don't take out the lines underneath, and I want them to kind of show through. To me, a map is informational. Even though it's a government map, they're actually occasionally beautiful. And so what I'm trying to do is add a little more information without detracting from that informational value. It's been very, very well received by the sportsmen and now by the horse industry, as well as the boating industry in particular. You know, people who have a boat that they bring their dog on it every week, and they travel to different locations, and they ask you to, they ask me to do their boat, their dog, their house, an osprey. So that they again get to kind of own me for a little while, or work with me intimately on creating this microcosm of what makes their life a little special.
America's artist Norman Rockwell chose the Berkshires as his home.
Well, the Norman Rockwell Museum is located in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and that's in the very westernmost part of Massachusetts in the beautiful Berkshire Hills. And we're in Stockbridge because that's the town that Norman Rockwell lived in the last 25 years of his life. He moved here from Arlington, Vermont, and spent well, half of his adult life in the country. He was actually born in New York City, and so he has a wonderful combination of urban and rural experience. But his years in the country really shaped what he chose to paint in his paintings. And if you look at the paintings in the museum, and we have the largest collection in the world of his art, you'll see models who are his neighbors and friends from town. And their children and grandchildren are very proud of the stories of their parents and grandparents having modeled for Norman Rockwell. And he just loved the sense of community in a small town, how everyone could know each other, and still does. I think that's one of the nice things about being in a small community, that you really can have a sense of who you live with and take care of each other and get to know your local residents really well. And also on the grounds, we have Norman Rockwell's studio, which is an incredibly special experience and place to visit. There are very few artist studios open as museums and open to visit in our country, although it's very common and popular in Europe to be able to visit artist studios. And you can see his easel and his brushes, his paint materials, how he spent his day, his office and work area, his library of books and prints, and it's really a very intimate space and a wonderful part of visiting here at the Norman Rockwell Museum. Visitors here to the museum always leave happier than when they arrived, and I think there is something about the art that people tap into their memories and tap into their experiences with their grandparents or friends and children, and he always saw the good in us. He saw the best in us and chose to celebrate that. And it's not that he was not aware that life has hardship, and he painted through 2 world wars and the Great Depression, and he cataloged the difficult times during the civil rights movement, but he always focused on the hopeful and the optimistic, which I think is the trait and character of human nature that he felt was the strongest in our American character. And I think that's what people love about the work, is they can feel happy and optimistic even when they're struggling through difficult times.
On the outskirts of Springfield, New England's largest fair, the Big E.
Well, the Big E is one of the top 10 largest fairs in North America. And what's really unique about this place is that it's the only fair in the country where more than one state participates. Here we're fortunate to have all 6 New England states, and they're represented on something we call the Avenue of States. And each one of the New England states has a full-scale replica of the original Capitol buildings of the states. And of course, in those buildings they showcase the tourism, agriculture, and some of the products of the various states. You can legally claim to have been in the 6 New England states because, again, it's the only place I know where a state actually owns property outside of its own border. So if you visit the 6 buildings, at the end of the day, in one spot you can say, I've been to all 6 New England states today at one time, in one place. A few years ago, we decided to have a band organ built specifically for the exposition. This is a very large one. It's one of the largest ones built in the last 20 years in the United States. We're very proud of it, and it represents probably a dying art in America. The Big E was founded actually back in 1916, so it's been around for a few years. And it was founded originally as a livestock show that was moved here from Chicago. And of course, over the years, the fair has evolved from that livestock show into a full-fledged exposition. Livestock is still surprisingly very important here in Massachusetts, and we have one of the biggest livestock shows in the Northeast United States. And many people come here for the food. There's everything from the Big E cream puff to fried macaroni.
Is that good?
Yeah, and can't leave out the circus. The Big E has a tradition of producing its own European-style circus, and each year I travel the country to select individual acts that represent countries from all over the world, and it's one of our most popular traditions here.
There's extraordinary history coursing through the veins of Massachusetts, unrivaled scenic beauty, populated with a kind and generous people that join this great nation in pursuit of liberty, freedom, and justice for all. Thanks for watching Discoveries America, Massachusetts.